the video, the buttons actually worked. Hello, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, the webcast where y'all ask SQL Server questions, or in this case, Power BI and Fabric questions, and we get to answer them. And I see Mountain James says over in the Twitch chat, is this one coming to us live from the hot tub? No, I have all my clothes on today, so there's no.
I wasn't invited to the hot tub. I didn't make the cut.
This is Eugene Meidinger, who we were just talking, and we've known each other for more than a decade now. Holy smokes, we're getting old. Eugene, introduce yourself to the crowd and tell them where you're from, what you do.
Yeah. So I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I love board games, and I do a mix of Power BI consulting and training courses. So I've done 13 different courses on Pluralsight, and next week my own course on Teachable is going to be coming out on Power BI performance tuning. It's really exciting. Yeah.
Very nice. And so he's got all the answers to Fabric and Power, not all of the answers, but a whole lot more of the answers than I have. I have zero of the answers there. So we'll go through your questions over PullGap. Those of you with eagle eyes will notice that the URL is ever so slightly different this time. The URL down below me is pullgap.com/room/SQLGene instead of mine. So we got a separate place to go ask questions over there. Don't ask your questions over in Twitch chat. Ask them at this URL. So the top voted question comes from Tim. Tim says, can Power BI fully replace SSRS? We're looking to migrate our reporting services on-premises server to a cloud service, and Power BI is being touted as the solution. Are there any gotchas with moving from SSIS to Azure Power BI?
Yeah, so it depends on how you mean the question. The short answer is no. Power BI can never replace SSRS, right? If we're talking about just Power BI. Anything that requires a page number or anything that requires being printed, you should never, ever do in Power BI. It's not designed for it. It doesn't print well. So if you want to do invoices, pay stubs, timesheets, don't do it in Power BI. Power BI is an analytical tool. The two things it's good at is filtering and aggregation. It is not good at layout and design. That said, they do have what are called paginated reports. This is SSRS shoved down the memory hole. They filed off the serial numbers. It's basically the same thing. Now, there isn't feature parity, but they're improving on that every day. So just in the past month, they announced dynamic subscriptions for paginated reports if you pay for premium, and that'll probably come to pro. So I would take a look at that because there's a good chance that you can make use of a Power BI Pro license, meet most of your analytical reporting needs with Power BI Pro, and then your printed stuff with SSRS or with paginated reports. The other option is Power BI Report Server, which is rebranding in the other direction. They took SSRS Report Server and just draped over a veneer of Power BI. It's the same code underneath. In fact, when I was first playing around with it, there was a little JavaScript flag that changed the branding if you were digging around. And so if you're heavily invested in SSRS, you may be better off going with that and having something that can still publish and render Power BI reports. So you have options, but Power BI is not a replacement for SSRS.
Gotcha. Let's see. Next up, we have James asks, now that Fabric has the workspace concept from Power BI, how do you determine when you need a new workspace? Do you base it on security or a topic or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's going to vary a lot by the size of your organization. So when it comes to Power BI, especially smaller orgs, usually what I recommend is doing a workspace per department. And the reason for that is because the security requirements tend to align well in the sense that if you're dealing with accounting, they're going to have access to more privileged financial information than operations would. They're also going to care about certain reports way more than operations would. So when I'm dealing mostly with Power BI, that's kind of the level that I think about. When we start to talk about Fabric and the data lake, there's the idea of data domains, which are a little bit broader than department. And so you definitely want to look into the idea of data domains and data mesh that kind of focuses on this idea. Now, one of the nice things is, even though we're doing the kind of workspace approach, OneLake has the support for this idea of shortcuts. So you can still kind of punch a hole and point to data in a different domain. But I would say if you're small and just starting out, do it around department, because a lot of your reporting artifacts are going to align that way. If it's a larger organization, you probably want something that's a little bit broader scope. So look into data domains and data mesh. There's people talking about this sort of thing.
It's always funny, like hearing answers on stuff like this totally reminds me of the things that I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I have no
Right.
idea what the answer to that is either. Next up, SQLCheese says, what's the best place to look for getting started with Power BI? Because Eugene has courses.
Right. Yeah. Right. So if you go to training.sqlgene.com, you can learn about performance tuning, but there's a lot of people who've been doing this stuff for a lot longer than I have. So the number one one is a guy in a cube on YouTube. They put out multiple videos a week. They're just awesome, real people. I would check out the SQL BI guys, Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. They also have some really, really good books on the subject. Power BI, unfortunately, is one of those subjects that I highly recommend grabbing a book or two and learning that way, because trying to Google your way through it is difficult. There's a lot of stuff that's simple that you can easily find, but the moment you start doing data modeling with DAX, you find out that the language is unintuitive and a lot of the names for stuff is just plain weird, right? And they're getting a little bit better with renaming some things. So now there's a function called like remove filters that does what you expect, but it's a challenge to learn. So there's a lot of great channels on YouTube. Like Brent said, I'm trying to do some of my own stuff. I got some old courses on Pluralsight as well. But I highly recommend grabbing a book or two also.
Let's see, next up, DeploymentNewb says, what's the best way to deploy reports with changing data sources, like for multiple customers that all need the same report?
Yeah. So at that point, you're kind of talking about making a product, right? And the easiest solution, pardon me, is to use Power Query parameters. So that's what I do a lot of times. And I've done this for like Power BI products, where you make a parameter for database server, or sorry, the server name and the database name, and you use that for all of them. And you can even make Power BI template files where you have to specify the values for that, and then it's kind of embedded in there. So that's going to be your easiest solution. Something you can look into as well if you're hosting everything are deployment pipelines, which allow you to have a little bit more fine-grained control over some of those details. But if it's something like you're deploying to the customer site, I definitely recommend just taking a look into Power Query parameters for that.
Cool. See, next up we have Catherine, who asks, how do I go about identifying slow performing measures and query steps when I inherit a massive Power BI report when I'm looking for some quick wins?
Right. So one of the one of the videos I just put out on YouTube covers the fact that there's way too many tools involved with trying to performance tune Power BI. So I think I ended up touching on like 16 of them, and some of them are community ones, some of those. But the problem is, first off, there's three different languages you're trying to learn how to work with. So there's SQL, there's M in Power Query, and there's DAX. And the performance problem could be in any one of those places, right? And the analogy I tell SQL people like Brent is, imagine if the only way to view execution plans or extended events was you would install Century One Plan Explorer, or I guess it's SolarWinds Plan Explorer, or all these external tools. That's been the situation in Power BI for a while, right? It's getting better. They've got some built-in stuff. They only just now in the past month added the ability to run arbitrary DAX queries and see how long they take. But to answer your question, for quick wins, the two tools that I recommend learning immediately is Performance Analyzer and DAX Studio. So Performance Analyzer is built into Power BI Desktop. You turn it on, you refresh a page or refresh an individual visual, and it's going to tell you how long did the visual take to render, how long was the DAX query to run, and then other, which is either waiting for stuff or background processes. So that's going to help you narrow down, okay, which one is the problem child. Then with DAX Studio, you can do a bunch more detailed stuff. It's the SQL Server Management Studio of DAX and analysis services. It's a free community tool. And with that, you can run a trace on every query that's hitting the engine. You can see the execution plans, although they'll look like gibberish because they're not visual. It's just a lot of text, right? But you can see the execution plans. You can see how much is hitting the formula engine, which is flexible but very slow, and how much is hitting the storage engine, which is narrow in what it can do but is very fast. So you want to be mostly the storage engine. And most of all, you can see what's taking up the most space in your data model. So you can look at the data model size metrics and see, okay, which columns are taking up space, which tables are taking up space. Because when you're dealing with DAX, it's similar to column store indexes in SQL Server, right? And so the data that you have matters a lot. If you've got unique columns like GUIDs or primary keys that you don't need, those are going to compress awful and take up a bunch of space. But not only that, you may have something turned on called auto date time. So Power BI does a lot of these features where they try to make life simple until you scale and it makes things awful. And so auto date time says, oh, you've got a date time column. We're going to make the SQL equivalent of an index for that. It's going to be a 6-column table for every single possible value of that. And you can't see it. You only see it when you like drag a date time column. And it can take up a ton of space if you have a big model, right? Just to summarize, my recommendation I talk about in the YouTube stuff is isolate, measure, modify. You just got to get into that cycle and keep doing it again and again. So that's my recommendations. But great question.
What's
Yeah,
the name of your YouTube channel too?
it is at SQLGene. So SQLGENE. And I put up module 1, all free.
Oh, woohoo! Let's see. April O'Neill asks, we provide software that creates payslips in PDF format. It's all on SSRS. Can Power BI provide the same feature and ideally use row level security and for like 20,000 users plus? I'm going to guess based on your earlier question, that's a no.
Right. So Power BI itself can't in the slightest, right? You can if you don't mind the layout looking very meh, you can do email subscriptions, you can do row level security. So if you don't care a ton about the looks and you just need to get a table sent to people, you certainly could do that. In your case, what you would be looking at is one of two things, given that scale. So you're either looking at Power BI Report Server, which is basically SSRS. In terms of licensing costs, it's more expensive than SSRS because you either have to pay for Power BI Premium, which we'll talk about as the second option, which starts at $5,000 per month, or you're paying for enterprise cores and software assurance, right? So not cheap. But if you need to stay on-prem, that's an option. If you're heavily invested in SSRS, you can just migrate everything over. The other option is Power BI Premium. So with Power BI Premium, you are paying for capacity, not per user. At 20,000 users, it pays for itself. It starts at $5 per month and it goes up in 2x increments. So 10,000, 20,000, that sort of thing. So if you've got something that's low frequency users, that can make sense. And with Power BI Premium, you also get paginated reports, right? I don't remember off the top of my head if paginated reports supports row level security, but I have a feeling that it would. But those would be your options, and that would be your licensing. So, I mean, you're looking at spending tens of thousands of dollars minimum, no matter what you're doing.
Ooh, which again makes us look cheap, which I
Yeah,
like.
right.
See, over in the Twitch chat, SQL Dev DBA says, I went with and implemented the enterprise plus software assurance route at my last job. I love Power BI reporting server. Adam says it does now support row level security too as well. That's good.
Good. Yeah, I was asking in anticipation, like, is there a list somewhere of like what's in SSRS and what's in paginated reports? But like I said, like all the branding and marketing, it feels like SSRS went down the memory hole and no one talks about it anymore. So it's hard to keep up.
Features that time forgot.
Yeah, really.
Let's see, next up, Malte asks, what's the best practice to deal with 2 or 3 large dimensions with more than 10 million rows? Unfortunately, my company uses matrices a lot with a lot of, or matrices a lot with a lot of details. The large dimensions seem to be a bottleneck. Oh my God,
Yeah,
amazing.
so I
With 10 million rows, how does that even?
no, I mean, no. I think that so that's it's not the matrix itself. The issue is um, so an example. I have a friend, Alex Zupler, who works for Bing and the advertising part. And so the dimension table has 10 million rows. So what should be ideally like 100 or 10,000 has way too many. Because you think about something like Bing, they have 1 million customers, they have 10 million customers, right? And I talked to him about this, and what he said is there's not a great solution. Your two options are just try and make it as compact as possible, or see if there's some sort of lower cardinality dimension you can kind of rip out of that as a second dimension, right? So yes, you've got, let's say for customer, maybe you have 10 million customers, but maybe you can break out region or geography or something like that. But there's not a lot of great solutions when you're dealing with that scale. It's kind of rough.
Let's, James asked the question. I'm surprised it took us this long to get to
Yeah,
chat.
right.
James says, I personally have not had a lot of success with ChatGPT when it comes to generating DAX code. Do you have libraries of DAX expressions that you usually use and could share?
No, I'm sadly like the artisanal handcrafted artist who's making everything from scratch. Like you'll find stuff out there for date tables, but that's the closest thing. Usually it's very specific to what the job is. I can confirm ChatGPT is cool for a lot of stuff. It is awful for DAX. And the thing to understand is even though ChatGPT seems like a miracle, it does the best when there's a large corpus of text that it can work off of that's high quality or reliable. With DAX, neither of those is true. There's not a lot of DAX code on the internet. It's not a popular programming language compared to C Sharp or script or anything like that. And most people get it wrong, right? So I'll give you an example. Someone on Reddit was saying, hey, how would you convert these Excel formulas to DAX? And someone else on Reddit was like, oh, just use ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, hey, can you do this? And it suggested using a function called earlier. I was talking earlier about how the naming for DAX is awful and a pain to learn. You would think, and I did 6 years ago, think that earlier is like lead lag in SQL Server. It's not at all. It's a lot more like the movie Inception, right? Because you have these evaluation contexts and you keep going deeper. Earlier takes you out of the dream one level, right? So no, I do not recommend using ChatGPT for DAX ever. What I do recommend, buy the two books by Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. One's the definitive guide to DAX. One's called like analyzing data with Power Pivot and Power BI, something like that. It's easy enough to find. Those books will help you be able to work with the DAX language. I've given presentations. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have a user group presentation about all the concepts to work through because that's the hard part with DAX. The language is simple. It's not that bad of a programming language overall, but you have to unlearn a bunch of stuff because it's operating on columns and tables. And so what I say when I talk about DAX is Excel will whisper in cells, SQL Server will speak in rows, and DAX shouts in columns. And if you don't understand that, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Nice. Digit Panda suggests DAXpatterns.com. Over in the Twitch chat, Adam says for specific cases, he finds that SQL BI has very good articles with patterns, which of course is Marco and Alberto there.
Yeah, I think DAX Patterns is by them as well. I'm fairly certain, but they have some of the best articles out there. Also, you can follow me. I've been doing DAX quizzes the past 7 weeks of
Oh, that's
trying to
right.
trick you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I find that it's a better way to help people learn because a lot of people have a lot of assumptions for how this works. And whenever you force people to kind of call their shot, they think a little bit deeper about it. And then when they find out they don't understand how it works, then it starts to click.
Where do you post those challenges at?
I've been posting them to Twitter, LinkedIn, and they're also on my weekly newsletter. So if you follow me anywhere, you should be able to find them.
I should give a shout out to Eugene's weekly newsletter. He does 5 links every week, and I don't even do Power BI work, but I find them very interesting. So there you go.
Yeah, definitely inspired by your newsletter.
Oh,
Whenever I quit my job, I'm like, I'll tell you the story just real quick. I know it's a
cool.
short
Oh,
thing.
this should be interesting. Yeah.
No, so okay. So I used to work at a place called Firefighter Sales and Service and then All Lines Technology. So it was this weird combination. But I quit and I had a non-compete. And it was 1 year and it was something stupid like a 50-mile radius. And whenever I quit my job, it was a blind jump and I still needed money. So I did some consulting and some work for them. They sent over the worst non-compete I've ever seen. It was 2 years and the same radius. I'm like, no. I talked to my lawyer, no. But that kind of inspired me to take ownership of, having an audience and connections and all that kind of stuff. And so I decided to start doing a newsletter and all that. So that was how it started. It
So
was a
funny.
big FU employer.
Oh, I just was just at a dropping off my car at a car dealer, a car mechanic here, and there's actually non-competes are unenforceable in Nevada if you're paid by the hour. And so,
Oh,
like
interesting.
car mechanics, they can jump from whatever shop to shop that they want. But managers or anybody who's like book sales or anything like that, if they're managerial in their salary, they have non-competes and they can't jump car dealers.
Yeah, it varies a lot by state. So
Yeah.
I learned from a SQL Saturday in Cleveland that Ohio is a blue pencil law. Pennsylvania is a little bit more flexible. So in California, if you've got a non-compete and it's unenforceable, they'll red pen it, throw it out. In Ohio, they'll transform it down till it is enforceable. And so it depends a lot on the state of what the laws are. Yeah, no fun.
All right, we'll do one more question. Let's see.
Cool.
Westside asks, when is it best to create DAX measures in Power BI versus creating measures in SSAS tabular? Is there a rule of thumb?
There really isn't a rule of thumb because it's mostly just where you're going to keep your data model, right? So if you're using both, I would put anything you think is reasonably going to be reused in tabular and then use report level measures for stuff that feels more like one-offs or that sort of thing. But I wouldn't expect a particular performance improvement or anything like that. So the general rule of thumb overall is Matthew Roche from the Fabric Cat team says, do your data transformations as uh, far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. So in this case, tabular would be upstream. So
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for hanging out with us. Thanks to Eugene for actually taking y'all's questions. If we didn't get to one of your questions, I'm going to send the list to Eugene and he can
yeah,
decide if he wants to put them into a blog post or whatever. And also, Eugene, you should wrap it up with shouts out to your YouTube channel and your brand new training class that's coming out.
yeah, awesome. So I'm at SQLgene on YouTube. Module one's completely free, not going to charge you anything. And Monday, February 5th, my course is coming out on training.sqlgene.com. First 50 sales, I'm going to push it out at midnight. First 50 sales are $20. You can use code Gucci, GUCCI, to get 50% off for $50. And then after that, it's going to be $100 till Black Friday, and you're out of luck. So
Nice. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see y'all on the next office hours.
thanks,
Adios, y'all.
guys.